Okay, so can I ask both Jeremy and James? We've seen, so BioMarin recently, they got approval for Vimizim, and they went on the record sort of saying it cost them $300 million from idea to the marketplace to get that drug there, and they did it in sort of about 5 years. Could you sort of give us some idea of the sort of, the sort of the metrics of what you were looking at to also sort of say, yes, we can, as a biotech company, can go it alone? Is that the high end of the numbers, or is it the about what you'd expect?
Well, I think Alexion's on record for spending nearly $1 billion to get our first drug approved. So, I can't necessarily speak to what rare disease industry averages are because I don't know if everybody discloses them. I can say that sounds cheap, actually, for its success. From a timeline perspective, Alexion started our first clinical development, I want to say I think it was 96 or so, and then eventually were approved in 2007, so that was 11 years. Second indication was obviously much faster. But yeah, I think that's maybe 5 years sounds a little fast, actually, because in the end, it also depends on the disease. I think they were lucky enough in MORC-EOA to actually have enough patients, but finding patients and having the infrastructure to actually run clinical trials around the world is important, because not only is your clinical development success dependent on finding patients, but so is ultimately your commercialization. So going wide is very important.
I can't speak specifically on somebody else's interpretation of how much it costs, and those numbers are fraught with issues. I'll give you one example I learned a long time ago. Actually, R&D accounting in pharmaceutical company P&Ls is really different in different countries and regions. So in some markets, really huge expenses like labor costs are added as R&D expenses, and in others they're not. So whenever I see those numbers, I don't really know what I'm looking at, and so it's hard to say that. The other comment I wanted to make is simply back to that necessity portion that I raised. So for us, in terms of our company, we of course are looking to the long term, but the long term isn't quite as important as the medium term, where we have proof of concept studies coming out in the next couple of years. And I think at that point, we may revisit and decide, is this a time for us to double down and continue to go it alone, or is this now a time for us to partner? And I think, to summarize my answer to your question, I think it's really got to be case by case. I wouldn't chisel those numbers in stone, what somebody's development program costs, because just what are they counting? And then I think you have to look at each program on a case-by-case basis. So, translational risk is a big thing. And a lot of these diseases that we're talking about today, the translational risk is somewhat lower than a more complex disease state like oncology. And that might provide some clue as well.
Okay. So Luke, so we've heard reasons why you might want to go solo. So Presenza 4 or 5 years ago decided to have a partner. Could you sort of give us some sort of insight into sort of what the thinking was there?
Sure, happy to do that and to share that with the audience. I would go back to something, how Presenza got started. I would say a little bit different than Alexion. We were started with one disease in mind. So not a drug in mind, but a disease in mind, which was Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We had a technology from Leiden University, and we had this crazy idea about exon skipping in Duchenne to, restore, different than enzyme replacement, but to restore the missing protein, dystrophin. We couldn't find any funding for it. There were some success stories yet, but I think, not that many in the orphan space. You had Genzyme, which was the only big example at that moment in time. And still, Alexion was coming, but not yet at where they are today. And so the only people that were willing to fund us were actually parents. We had parents talking to us, reaching out to us, say, we've been successful in business. We know how to raise money. We raised funds to help our son because nobody's working on this terrible disease. And so because we were created around the disease, I think that's one big difference, because then there's this also big pressure to go as fast as possible because these parents see their kids deteriorate from year to year. So our mantra has always been anything we can do to, on the one hand, broaden the number of patients we can help and to accelerate development is something we would like to do. And all the points that were mentioned earlier, there's the translational risk, there's, there weren't that many precedents in how to design a study. To find the patients, we knew if we wanted to do a larger study, we needed to go global. How do you do all of that? So if we can find a deal that was, in our view, better to help treat patients earlier and to help to treat more patients, that would be something we would definitely consider. Of course, necessity is something else as well. I think 2008, 2009 were still a little bit different in terms of trying to fund biotech companies than today. I think the public markets have opened up. I think it was much more difficult to do that at that moment of time. So all these things together, made us decide to structure a deal, and we found a partner at that moment, Glaxo, who was looking to enter into the space. So we felt like on the one hand we have the big pharma muscle power resources, we have our expertise, which in a disease they want to enter, that could be a perfect marriage, and that's how we started off with the deal. I think the last other aspect I want to mention is that we had this ambition still to also keep parts of it for ourselves. So we haven't partnered the whole Duchenne portfolio. We made a quite complex deal where we kind of gave a license to one, an option on 3 other products, and then all the rest was us. So just to give some background on that, depending on the genetic variation that causes Duchenne, there's many different genetic mutations that can cause the disease. We needed to develop a different product. So also different than the Alexion and maybe also the Dicerna story, where you have one drug which you try to find diseases for in a pipeline of diseases. We had one disease with a pipeline of products, all targeting very small subpopulations of patients. So we partnered part of those subpopulations and the lead one to the pharma to, I would say, trailblaze the path forward. And then we would follow on with a number of the other exon skippers for other subpopulations where we would go all the way. But we would, I would say, piggyback or ride along with our big pharma partner. And so we really felt that at that moment in time, it was the best thing to do for us, for Glaxo, but mainly for patients. And I think that's the main reason why we entered into the partnership in 2009.